Hello, and welcome to the 27th episode of Course Place. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me for today's conversation. In today's episode, I'll be talking about my trip to Montana from 2023 and the similarities or differences from visiting in 2021. As always, if you like what you hear, please leave a review and/or comments, follow my podcast, and tell your friends. Also, please follow the podcast page I've made on Facebook. If you'd like to contact me via email instead of a Facebook message, you can email me at corachin@mailbox.org. If you are new here, welcome. I'm your host, Cora, and I'm so excited to have you on this journey with me. Today, I want to share my 2023 experience of Montana and talk about the differences and similarities from that trip and my 2021 Montana experience. I want to start by sharing a short recap of the 2021 trip. Then, I will briefly get into sharing about the 2023 experience and also comparing/contrasting the two trips to each other. However, before I get into that, I want to share a change I decided to make to the podcast. I have decided that instead of trying to find a verse that goes with every episode, I want to share a truth to remember and a verse that goes along with that truth. An example truth could be, "You are made in God's image." And a verse could be either Genesis 1:27 or Psalm 139, verse 14. I could also expand on those thoughts too and make a little mini devotional out of it. Please let me know your thoughts and if you have an idea of a creative name that I could name that segment. My grandma gave me that idea when we were talking recently as of the recording of this episode, and I liked it. It might take me a little while to figure out how to integrate it into the episode the way I want to, though. My grandma suggested that I could either do it at the beginning of an episode or at the end of an episode. I'm not sure which part of an episode I would want to put it in yet, though. One idea I had come to mind for a name for that segment when I was writing for this episode was Truth Talk. If I stick with that name for the segment, I could transition to it by saying something like, "Now, let's move on to this week's Truth Talk." If you have any thoughts or comments on this, please let me know in a comment on my Facebook page, an email, a Facebook message, or through the link in the show notes to leave a voice message. Now, sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy today's episode. Going in 2021 was my first time out there. I got to visit with my grandparents, a couple of my uncles and their families that live out there. I loved that. I had many new experiences and also a lot of chances to work on faith over fear. To hear a really deep dive into the story of that trip, you can go back to episodes 8 through 10 of the podcast, where I go more in depth about the 2021 trip. I didn't get to go to Glacier National Park on that trip, but we still did lots of fun things. I unfortunately did end up getting sick for a few days with a cold the first time I went out there, but I was able to recover very quickly because of my grandparents taking care of me and because of God's grace. Both grandparents flew out there with me on that trip, and then just my grandpa and I flew back to Illinois when I returned home. The big lesson/takeaway I had from that trip was that I learned to trust God, to step out in faith, that adventure/trying new things can be really fun, and that I really like trying new things. With the 2023 trip, my second time, my brother flew out there with my grandpa and I. My grandma didn't get to come with us on the flight to Montana this time, like she did in 2021, but being reunited with her when she picked us up from the airport was incredible. I was so extremely excited to see her and hug her. Some of the same experiences on the 2023 trip from the 2021 trip were going to a super yummy ice cream place, going to a couple of churches I got to visit in 2021. One in the 2023 visit was just for a fundraiser event though, and not for a service like in 2021. Flying there, seeing the family out there, getting to drive the side-by-side, which is like an oversized golf cart, getting to be reacquainted with their dog, going to a state park close to my grandparents' house, not Glacier National Park, but a different one, walking, seeing pretty sunsets, and that kind of thing. Another thing that was similar on this trip versus the 2021 trip was that saying goodbye to my grandparents was really hard again, like the 2021 trip. If you would like to hear a more in-depth version of the 2021 trip, you can go back and listen to episodes 8 through 10. On the 2023 trip, I also got to make a quilt with my grandma that has probably become one of my most prized possessions now. It is so soft and wonderful to curl up under. I love knowing that my grandma and I got to make that quilt together. It is one of my absolute favorite things to curl up with, and I love getting to use it while I sleep. It was pretty easy to make, but it did take us a few days. I did a pattern of fabric blocks. We sewed the blocks together into rows, then we eventually sewed all the rows together. My grandma sewed the back fabric on the whole back side of the quilt, and then I tied the top and bottom fabrics together with yarn once I got home. To keep the quilt together until I was able to get home and tie it with yarn, we used safety pins. I think the big takeaway I had from the 2023 trip is that trying new things is fun, being able to reconnect with family members you rarely see is fun, and the importance of in-person quality time. Some of the differences between the two trips were, my brother came with on the 2023 trip, my mom came too, but not until later on the 2023 trip, landing in Seattle for a short layover in 2023, but not 2021, riding a train in the Seattle airport to get to our gate, getting to fly with my grandpa and brother one day in a small airplane that one of my grandparents' friends has, not getting sick during the 2023 trip like I did during the 2021 trip, getting to go to a quilt show with my grandma in 2023, getting to go out to Glacier National Park in 2023. We didn't do a cousin sleepover in 2023 like we did in 2021. I got to make or help make dinner a couple of times on the 2023 trip. I got to sew with my grandma in 2023, but not 2021, which I mentioned a couple minutes ago. Seeing 2 of the 3 cousins a little more. My mom, brother, and I took the train back to Illinois instead of flying or driving back. It didn't take quite as long to adjust to my grandparents' dog in 2023 as it did in 2021. Trying Huckleberry Shakes on the 2023 trip, but not 2021. My grandma picked us up from the airport in 2023 instead of flying with us like she did in 2021. I got to try a couple new-to-me restaurants in 2023 that I didn't try in 2021, and we didn't go to the waterfalls, Swinging Bridge, or into Idaho in 2023 like I did in 2021. Saying goodbye to my grandparents at the end of both trips was extremely hard. I'm not sure which one was harder. Maybe the one after the 2023 trip, but the 2021 trip goodbye was also hard. When we said goodbye after the 2021 trip, I had to try so extremely hard to hold back tears for a little while. My grandma was definitely on my mind for the first little while when she first left the airport and a little while during that plane ride home with my grandpa. Saying goodbye in 2023 was also hard, but we kind of got to say goodbye twice. Once at their house early that morning, even though she was there, when my grandparents dropped my brother, mom, and I off at the train station, and then once at the train station. We had to get up really early in the morning because the train station was I think about a half hour or so from my grandparents' house, and the train left that morning. The goodbye at their house before going to the train station was so difficult. I cried a little. I don't usually cry all that often, but I did that morning. And I think a lot of it was because she had given me this hug that made me feel safe and like I could cry, and that she wouldn't judge me, even if I did cry. The night before we had left, I really started to dread leaving Montana. Montana is one of my happy places, and I always hate leaving. I have only been out there twice, but I still hate leaving regardless. I think it's because I get so used to being out there in different surroundings with people I love and just kind of getting a break from my normal routine for a little bit. While missing some of my normal routine out there is a little hard, like church or my small group, I love being with my family that lives out there. I don't really get to see them as often as I would like. The only ones in Montana that I get to see, at least somewhat often, are my grandparents though. Spending quality time with family you don't see very frequently is so special and very valuable to me, especially because you never know when it could be your last moments with a loved one. You need to be intentional about spending time on a regular basis with the people you love. Life could change in an instant, and they could be gone. Once they are gone, you won't be able to see them or contact them anymore. I know that for me, I want to be more intentional about spending quality time with people I love and don't see often. Growing in relationships with your loved ones and friends can be an amazing blessing. I know that sometimes people don't always have a great relationship with their family or just some family members, but I am so thankful God has allowed me to cultivate such a close relationship with the members of my family that I am close to. The train ride home on the 2023 trip was really hard for me at first. And then when we were on the other train, to get closer to home, we had to take 2 trains. I had a lot of trouble keeping myself from crying. I had trouble with that because I was really missing my grandma and being in Montana. I did eventually readjust to being home again, but it took me a little while. Ever since the first time I went out there in 2021, I've had this idea I could move out there so I could see my family out there more and be a lot closer to my grandparents. Leaving in 2023 was definitely one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please follow, leave a comment and or review of my podcast if you haven't already, and please follow my podcast page on Facebook so you never miss an update. If you have any verses you'd like me to read on a future episode, or if you have any topics you'd like me to talk about, you can email me at corachin@mailbox.org, send me a message on my podcast page on Facebook, or a voice message through the link in the show notes, and I will get back to you when I can. Hope you tune in next week for the 28th episode.